Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden, or in this case it feels a bit like a jungle at the moment. And it's now time to start thinking about the things to sow in April for your self-sufficiency journey. I'm turning this into a bit of a monthly series, and I think to start off this video it's important to start off with a bit of messaging. Often when you think about self-sufficiency, you've got to be facing the prospect of eating a lot of food that you've grown. And I think before you start thinking about certain crops or certain varieties, to just make a note of the things that you just really enjoy eating, and to try and find something that you really enjoy eating in each season, maybe 1 or 2 crops per season, and those can act as your staple crops, because you know it's going to be really hard to get tired of them, and that's kind of half of the battle. I think I always talk about diversity in the garden and having loads of choice, and I always think that that's a lovely thing to have, especially if you're thinking about flavour. But I think sometimes if you're looking at purely feeding yourself, having simplification where you pick a couple of staples for each season and then you add diversity on top of that, I think it kind of builds you up to a much more promising start. You know, you don't have to think about things whether they're going to be carby or whether they're going to be full of protein. It's more just like a nice bulking agent, something that you can even have as a side dish to every meal. For example, one of my winter ones has to be leeks. They maybe don't have like loads of protein or loads of carbs, but they taste really good and I don't get tired of eating it. And you've got that practice where if there were things that you just enjoy eating because they just sing to you, the goal is every day you're always going to be eating something from the garden, so you maintain that connection throughout the year. Even though it's a lot quieter in winter, you still have that connection. April is a very exciting seed sowing month, and also May, 2 massive months for seed sowing. They're definitely my 2 busiest. March is a nice little warm up to remind myself about how it all works and have a little bit of fun, but April is where a lot of stuff happens. Touching on what I mentioned before in diversity, there's so much that you can do in April. It's virtually everything. Even if this is for zone 7, zone 8 by the way, I can even start a lot of my squash off in April, a lot of the tender plants, because I'll be able to hold them off until mid-May, late May for planting outside. So it's really exciting. And it's really important that you try and grow a nice range of crops, because there is always a chance it's going to be quite a cruel summer. It could either be very wet and cool and miserable, or it could be boiling hot and drought. And the thing about that is that there's always going to be a couple of crops that are going to absolutely relish that. If it's really wet, then the brassicas are probably going to do really well. If it's really dry, then maybe more of the fruiting crops. So just making sure that you cover those boxes, where knowing that there's always going to be something that thrives no matter what the weather, I think that puts you a little bit at ease. So we're going to start off with probably one of the most essential staples for self-sufficiency. That is potatoes. We're talking about Sarpomeras. It's a really important variety because of its amazing blight resistance. And yeah, some people say it doesn't taste very good. Apparently, I don't agree with that. I think it tastes absolutely fine, especially because usually I'll make potato wedges, or I'll make some mashed potato and then I'll add butter and herbs and stuff. So it's just a very solid potato to grow. You can grow them either in pots, or you can just dedicate a part of your garden outside to grow a load of potatoes. And Sarpomeras are my kind of main crop that I can then keep on harvesting right throughout winter, provided they have some protection from the cold. You can just leave them in the ground. You might right now be feeling a bit overwhelmed. You might be thinking, how can I fill my space? I've got so much space and I don't know what to do with it. Well, just putting a load of it under 2 potatoes, where you could just mulch with some seaweed or some grass clippings or some straw and just kind of set it aside. Yeah, you might not have the best crops, but at least that ground is doing something. At least there's plants in the ground. At least you're going to be getting a harvest, and it just gives you a little bit more time, rather than feeling like, I don't know what to do, and then it turns to weeds and it becomes demoralizing. Growing your own food, especially to feed yourself, is about finding easy ways that work for you, and whenever possible just gets rid of any stress, so you can just have a bit of fun. The priority is about soil health, and having plants in the soil for as long as possible. It's one of the best things you can do to have a thriving garden that's going to feed you. April is a great month to sow virtually any kind of bean. You can include broad beans and field beans in that mix. You can include bush beans, but also it's really important to think about climbing beans. The useful thing about climbing beans is that they serve that purpose of being able to take up vertical space. If we have limited growing space, then growing things like bush beans, they could be taking up valuable space where you might be wanting to grow something that you enjoy eating more, like carrots. And so by thinking about the vertical and dedicating the vertical areas or building trellises to grow climbing beans, it means that you can still grow a lot of food in a very small amount of space. You can be clever with this. You can use the climbing beans to cast shade. So I like to interplant them with, say, parsley, for example. You can do it with salads. But the thing that's also nice about climbing beans is that you've got the option to either have them fresh, or you can grow varieties that are dedicated for drying beans. And that means that if you grow a load of drying beans, then you can think about having a lot of nice stews or casseroles over late autumn and throughout winter that gives you protein that you've grown in your own garden. And because they're drying beans, they're very easy to store. One crop I would suggest, purely because it is just so easy in terms of the flavour, you don't have to do anything with it, is fennel. If you like fennel, start sowing it in April. You can direct sow, you can start it off in modules. But fennel works so well because you can roast it on a fire outside, you can roast it in your oven. All you need to do is add a little bit of olive oil, maybe a pinch of salt or pepper, but it's such a delicious crop that doesn't take up too much space. And then if you're thinking about pickling, if you're going to be growing cucumbers, for example, the leaves of fennel are very delicious. You can add those into salads, you can use that with pickling. It's just an added harvest. Another crop to sow in April, and this is something to do directly, is carrots. Carrots, just delicious. Delicious to eat raw as well. Sometimes you just need a nice snack to be able to enjoy. The thing that's held me back about carrots is, firstly, was germination, but as long as you use a plank method when direct sowing, germination of carrots is very easy. Then it was the case of having to deal with carrot root flies. And so growing a variety like resistor fly or flyaway is a nice way to work around that without having to worry about a lot of protection. But if you're thinking about simplification for self-sufficiency and you dedicate a whole raised bed to carrots and you do create a kind of a protective structure around, that protective structure is going to be so easy to build. It's not going to take you that much time. You can use it every single year, but the amount of carrots that you can grow in a raised bed that's maybe 10 by 4 foot is a huge amount, especially if you sow a main crop variety that you can then, in late autumn, you can mulch over the tops with maybe some leaves or some straw. You can be pulling carrots throughout winter, and they're just, carrots are so delicious. Another workaround is for the initial carrots that I've started off, I've sown them in hotbeds. Hotbeds are over 2 feet high, they're over 60 centimetres high, which apparently carrot root fly don't fly above that height. And so being 3 foot off the ground, they are protected from carrot root fly. So that's another nice little workaround. Think about ways that perhaps you can grow carrots in an elevated position. Now I'm going to do a bit more of a dedicated video about this in May, which is about one thing that a lot of vegetable gardeners, if you're new to growing food, can easily forget about, and it's about winter vegetables. The downside of winter vegetables is that they take a long time to mature, like swedes and parsnips, etc. However, the upside is that unlike something like peas, where you've really got to be on it with the harvesting and then they're over, the winter veg just can spend 3 or 4 months sitting in the ground, in our climate anyway. So you've basically got through winter a pantry or a greengrocer where everything is just there ready. It's not going to run to seed, it's not going to bolt, and you can just harvest as and when you need it. And so starting any kind of winter veg, whatever you like, parsnips, swede, leeks, kale as well, making sure that they get a nice stretch of growing season to mature and develop, and it means that they're then a good size, ready for you to enjoy over winter time. I would definitely throw purple sprouting broccoli into that mix. Ours is literally just about to come into harvest. It's April now. It's very leafy. There's a lot of flower shoots, but purple sprouting broccoli is delicious, and I'm very happy to add that into the mix. And so making sure that you sow that in April, just to guarantee a nice healthy production for purple sprouting broccoli. I'm really excited to get harvesting that. That's the other thing that's nice about kale. You've got the leaves over winter and you've got the flower shoots to enjoy in early spring, giving you additional harvests. A new discovery for me this year was overwintering some purple kohlrabi. It's now run to seed, and that too was creating flower shoots that look just like red kale flower shoots. And I ate some the other day, kind of a quick stir fry, and they were absolutely delicious. So I'm looking forward to enjoying more of those. I'm going to throw a slightly odd one into the mix, and that is nasturtium. The reason why is that I think it's so important that we always remember about pollinators and just adding some colour into our garden. And the nice thing about nasturtium is that it does both. It brings in the pollinators, especially the bumblebees. It adds a lot of colour, and it's a nice way to fill gaps. It's a nice kind of living green mulch to mulch ground without actually having to take up loads of kind of root space, because you've got one plant and it just spreads out and it can protect a lot of ground. I really like nasturtiums because I like the fieriness of the leaves, the stems, the flowers, and then of course the seeds, which are known as poor man's capers. When pickled, they can add a really nice flavour to a lot of the cooking, some of your pasta dishes later on in winter. I'm not much of a fan of summer squash like courgettes, etc. in terms of purely their value as self-sufficiency. Yes, they are ridiculously prolific. However, there's only so much that I can eat of them. So what I would say, instead of worrying about the summer squash right now, start thinking about winter squash. The squash that is going to store, the squash that has a little bit more flavour, some more sweetness. So obviously you've got pumpkins, you've got spaghetti squash. I love spaghetti squash. Jumbo pink banana squash as well. The kind of things that are easy to store, that are tasty. You can roast them, you can make them into soups. When you harvest garlic and then you've got your own garlic, I feel like garlic and winter squash, the two flavours, perfect combination. That is a real way to feed yourself. Of course, we have annual herbs as well. Any single annual herb, you chuck this into the list of what to sow in April. Coriander, dill, basil, parsley, chervil. These are all so delicious. A nice way to kind of pack a punch with anything that you're making, especially if you're thinking about making your own sauces, like making a nice coriander and chili dressing maybe later down the line, or some dill. All of these things, absolutely delicious. Basil. Every year I get more and more keen and excited about how delicious basil is. And so starting basil off, sometimes in April and May as well, you need to potentially add a little bit of heat, like maybe a heat pad or a heated propagator to help germinate the plants. Pot them on, plant them out into your polytunnel. Grow as much basil as you can, because that is just such a joy. It's so nice to have that available. I think there's some plants, things like coriander, like basil, like parsley, where it's good to always just have an excess of, because they don't take up much space. And of course, I'm going to have to add beetroot into the list of things to sow. If you're not so keen on beetroot, grow golden beetroot. It is an absolute revelation. Now, if you're thinking about self-sufficiency, a big part of that is creating the fertility for your garden, and that means compost. Now, if you have a small space, you might find it hard to justify being able to dedicate an area to a compost bin or 2 compost bins. Well, this video right here might help you out. It is an experiment that we did. It was a raving success, and it shows you how to make a lot of compost, high quality compost, in your pathways. So check that one out.